Susan Combs was elected Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts in 2006. This was after, in 1998, when she became the first woman elected Agricultural Commissioner after serving 2 terms in the Texas House of Representatives. Prior to these forays into electoral politics, Comptroller Combs received her undergraduate degree from Vassar College. Her first work experiences include international advertising, Wall Street financial markets, and working in the federal government. She returned to Texas and received her law degree from this university. After graduating, she then served as an ADA in Dallas. The office of the Comptroller may seem to some of you like one of the less glamorous jobs in Texas. But it seems fair to note that periods of detailed work related to tax collection, accounting, and revenue is frequently punctuated by moments of high visibility at the intersections of policy and politics. And if you doubt the political aspects of the job, just consider that Susan Combs was preceded in the office by Carol Strayhorn, John Sharp, and Bob Bullock, folks not exactly known for being political wallflowers. If her style seems more subtle than her predecessors, Susan Combs is no slouch herself. She's racked up 3 successful statewide campaigns, and at least from the outside, made it look easy. She now sits in the Comptroller's chair during what are, to say the least, very interesting political times for anyone in a position of leadership in the state. Join me in welcoming her back to the University of Texas at Austin.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It's my pleasure today to give you a little bit of insight into what the job is about, and then, of course, to take your questions. We know everything, and we do everything. We're the chief financial officer of the state. We're the treasurer. We're the tax collector. We're the bill payer. We're the revenue estimator, which is actually very, very important because the legislature cannot spend money without our office saying how much there is to spend. We do post-payment audits for state agencies. That's kind of interesting. If they've written a check and there's concern about was the check actually for something that happened, we check on that to see whether they've complied with statutes, rules, etc. And let me start off a little bit by talking about tax, which nobody ever likes to talk about. When I was a prosecutor in Dallas, I sat at one table over here prosecuting people, juvenile delinquents and child abusers, and then on the other side would be the defendant, and then there was a judge in the middle. And my office, the Dallas County DA's office, did not pay the salary of the judge. And one of the first things I did, in fact, it was the first day I took office on January the 2nd, I did a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, with a neutral tax tribunal called the SOA, State Office of Administrative Hearings. We moved all of the ALJs out of the office over to SOA. Did it the first day because I wanted to be sure that people perceived that the tax process was fair, so that it's been my belief that if people believe that the taxes are assessed fairly, the process is fair, that you're more likely to pay it. So we moved those over on the 2nd. We also then spent about a month developing a new tax case process. And a couple of things I was concerned about was I'd heard out across the state that, gee, I sent in my information, they said I owed some money and I hadn't heard from them for a while. So I thought, well, okay, we will go ahead and impose timelines on us and timelines on the taxpayer. And there was a particular reason for doing this. If you're at all connected to the law, you understand statutes of limitation. You have a certain period of time within which to bring a matter or you're out of luck. And the practice in some cases had been to what's called bust the statute, meaning that if it was a 4-year statute, you might go along. There was a case, a taxpayer got a refund of about $130 million and it went back 11 years. And I said, that's not good practice, not good business practice. If you're a business owner, you want your money in or you want your taxes back. And so we have completely changed the tax case process. We've now added mediation. We've added multiple reviews. If you don't think the auditor is doing the right kind of job, we don't go to the auditor's supervisor. We leave the audit shop and go someplace else so that you will hopefully be convinced that it is fair. We also took a look at how we spend your money. And one of the things that we're doing on the 4th day I was in office, I put up on the web every single expenditure item by unit of the Comptroller's office. And what that means is, by unit, I mean pencil versus category. Category would be office supplies. Item would be pencils. And so up on the web on January the 4th, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, put up every single thing that we spend, because I kept hearing that people didn't know how government spent their money, really want to know how we spend the money, and can you please add more transparency to the process. And so that went up on January the 4th. Took me a while to sort of massage some of the other state agencies. We have the legislative authority to make them report to us in a uniform financial reporting system. So I got 20 about other agencies who had the software capability and had the data encoded to get down to the pencil level. The other 180 agencies are not there, but it's all up on the web. And so if you go to www.window.state.tx.us, you can find this. Well, we thought that was kind of nifty, and so then I added something else. I thought, gee, let's go ahead and show how we write the actual checks, because one of the things people get kind of irritated about is, well, it's still too arcane. How can I figure this out? And so October the 1st, pursuant to a piece of legislation that I worked on with Representative Mark Strama, on the web now, as of October the 1st, every single check, it's a virtual check register. It is the date, the amount, the payor, the payee of every single check in the state. And we're the only state of anything like this size to do this. I believe that Missouri is doing something like that, but basically we're it, and we're pretty huge. And it is a searchable, mineable database, and we're looking for thoughts. If any of you try to search it and you think, gee, it's still not helpful, please let us know, because we're going to try to make it easier. Technology is something we've been working on a lot, and we've gotten something called a business intelligence tool. And it's sort of back to, if you're in business, you have no idea unless you keep data how you're doing. What are your customers doing? How many widgets do you have? Are you selling widgets time? Is your inventory, is it first in, first out? How are you running your business? Well, the state's business is what I'm taking charge of, and the tax case process is one such. And I didn't know, for example, and this business intelligence tool has just been delivered September the 15th, if we have one auditor spending 30 days doing an audit and somebody else, exact same kind of stuff, spending 90. I want to know, why does the second guy spend 90 and the first person spend 30? And there's some ways we can train that person. And it's all about data collection and gathering to know what you're doing. And we're such a big state. I mean, if Texas were its own country, this is pretty nifty. If Texas were its own country, we'd be the 10th largest economy in the world. And added to that, I think, geographically, this is important, Texas is bigger than France. And I think it's mindful to remind ourselves that France, no matter what they say in their food, we're bigger and we're better. I mean, I'm sorry, I get kind of a rant about France. We're also, just so you know this, we are also the niftiest shaped state in the country. There are these children from these boring rectangular shaped states, and you take a look at these little kids, 3rd grade and 4th grade, how on earth, in a puzzle, how can they find their state? You take the name off, our kids can always find the state of Texas. So back to tax collection, which I know you're fascinated with. By the way, when I ask people if they'd like to contribute taxes, nobody raises their hand. I'm sort of at a loss to know why people don't want to fund Texas. But nobody ever raises their hand. We do try to find out, though, how we can make the tax process better. We also took a look at all the money inside the agency, and I got there and I said, well, gee, how many publications do we have? Nobody knew. So we started asking people. So they ran around and piece of paper. There were 497 separate kinds of publications. And so we began to save a bunch of money because you went online. All of you young whippersnappers use Go Online. And I'm the dinosaur Luddite, but I'm nonetheless able to go online as well. And so we've got all that stuff online now, saved about $250,000 on that. And then I said, well, how many forms are there? We never met a form we did not like. We like forms. So we have about 5,000 of these, and we're trying to shrink those. The old phrase, the check is in the mail, I hope never happens. We don't want the check to be in the mail. I got a bill passed to do what's called electronic funds transfer. It used to be that if you owed a tax liability of $100,000, you had to do an EFT. Partly we liked it because of the float. We want to capture the float. But it's also people opening envelopes. All these people opening envelopes. So I got a bill passed to bring it down to $10,000. And so as of January the 1st, If you owe $10,000 or more in certain categories of taxes, you will do it by EFT. We expect that to save a lot of stamps, a lot of people's time, a lot of other stuff. One of the concerns that the legislature had about that was they said, well, that's fine, but how about the folks who really aren't sort of, you know, computer literate? And so we're giving the folks until the fall, September of '08, and for their tax returns to be digital, giving them until then, but the dollar limit's raised to $50,000. You know, I've spent a lot of time out in rural Texas, and we've got, 2.9 million people in the state in small, non-metropolitan areas, which is, by the way, larger than 22 other states' populations. We're a very big state, but those folks are out there. They really don't have a T1 line, even though we had the Telecommunications Infrastructure Fund, which was to deliver the ability to do bandwidth to lots of places. They don't necessarily know how to do it. And I ranch in an area where we're beyond the 3-mile limit, and so we have to get a satellite. So for a lot of these people, paying their taxes online, doing a lot of this online is sort of a struggle. We also took a look at other ways we're spending money, and we have done what's called a business process improvement. We've been doing that now for about 6 months. Yesterday was the day we ended stage 1, and we're finding sort of weird savings. We've already saved about $2.3 million. Give you an example. There were 5 separate toner cartridge contracts within the agency. And we said, that's crazy. Why not have one contract? Well, we now have one contract. We saved $73,000 by having one contract. We got legislation to let us quit publishing a duplicate health claims guide, which is already being done by the Health and Human Services folks. That was $250,000. We had about $500,000 of IT folks, outside external contractors. Let those folks go. We're doing it all in-house. We've saved about $2.3 million basically by just sort of following the motto, simpler, smarter, faster. Everything we do has to reflect our central vision, which is that it's your money. All of this money is your money. The Treasury has about $37 billion in it. We write all these checks as money comes in, money comes out. But if we think of the funds as sort of fungible, is not real, that doesn't work very well for you folks who wonder why on earth are they charging me these taxes. Procurement, buying stuff. There was a agency called Texas Building and Procurement Commission, and through a bill, the procurement arm came to me as of September the 1st, and so we are now ramping up, looking at other states to see how we can do what's called strategic sourcing. General Motors and Ford, which is interesting, General Motors and Ford buy stuff together. They have a joint buying co-op for certain things like steel, et cetera. And so if General Motors and Ford can do it, it seems to me that we can do it as well. So we're taking a look at one-stop shopping, managing the contracts. One of the things we don't do well in the state, we sometimes feel like we get out-lawyered. We write a contract for something, a good or service, whatever it is, and then the vendor, who is, of course, talented and bright and aggressive, will write a contract that may be tilted their way. We have to be very clear-eyed about managing the state's resources and saying that we're not going to end up getting rolled. Again, it's our job not to get the state rolled on these contracts. Let me give you a couple of quick things we're doing that are sort of interesting. We took, by the way, for your information, the confidential information off the Texas Tomorrow Fund. Any of you on a Texas Tomorrow Fund contract, well, all of your personal information is now gone. We took all that stuff off. We're very, very mindful. This is kind of an interesting issue for us. Data security, really, really important for us. We get about 65,000 hack attempts a month on the computers. And so it's very important for us to be sure that if we have folks, confidential information, we don't want to give it out. Unclaimed property. You may have had an apartment rental contract, let's say 3 years ago, and you put down $150 and then you forgot to get your money back. Well, that money, the apartment building guys put that money into the unclaimed property fund, and you can go online and take a look and try to get it back. We've streamlined that process. We've raised the limit now to $5,000. We can do it overnight within 24 hours to get your money back. But Texas does try very, very hard to get your money back. We have about $1.7 billion total that we're trying to give back. Some of the issues are like John Williams. Is that John A. Williams, John Z. Williams, John D. Williams, what town's he in? And they move, folks move. California, by contrast, has $5.7 billion in unclaimed property, and the federal courts have stepped in because what happened was in California, this money was sitting there being used to balance the budget. And instead of making concerted efforts to tell people, here's your money, come and get it, they spent $15,000 a year, and the federal court said that won't work. You're not really making any kind of effort to give people their money back. The unclaimed property, we reduced the inventory of pending claims by about 35%. We also do research. So I've mentioned tax collection, I mentioned bills paying, that kind of thing. Let me talk about research. When I was Agriculture Commissioner, you may remember this evil person. There was a really terrible person named Susan Combs who took all of those soft drinks out of elementary schools and said, well, that was me. And I did that because I used to handle starvation cases. I handled cases where children were starved by their parents and they would end up with failure to thrive, and some of them would have brain dysfunction. And what we are now doing, and I feel fairly strongly about this, we are now feeding our children to death. And so in 2003, I tried to get legislation passed, which I was not able to get passed, but I got the power by fiat to remove FMNV's foods of minimal nutritional value from schools. And so with that in mind, we're taking a look still at what the effects in the state are of obesity. And we published a report that said that it cost Texas businesses an estimated $3.3 billion a year in 2005, and it'll be $15.8 billion by 2025 if we don't do something about this. PE. How many of you had mandatory PE in middle school? Okay, well, you're lucky. Because what's happening now is that mandatory PE is not happening, and we tried to get legislation passed this session to require PE. I remember well sweating profusely doing PE, and no, I'm sorry, horses sweat, men perspire, and ladies are all in the glow. And so I glowed through middle school and high school. But we had PE. We could not get a bill passed to make it really mandatory because other folks intervened and said that some other activities are more important. So the Comptroller's office gets to do things like figure out how much revenue there was. And the fiscal note process, determining what something costs, is a function of the office. So I put a fiscal note of 0 on a $20 million rider in the bill pattern for the Texas Education Agency, because I said if we put $10 million a year in to persuade schools to do PE for middle schoolers, that they will generate at least the $10 million a year. We will zero cost it. And I'm a firm believer that if we can get these kids to exercise and not sit in front of a machine all the time, that we can make some progress. We're also doing an energy study. That'll be out in January. Very, very interesting from a policy perspective. We never look at, in fact, nobody in the country really looks at what is the net unit cost per kilowatt hour of the oil sector, the gas sector, wind, solar, nuclear, water, coal, you name it, ethanol, biomass, biodiesel. And so we're taking a look at that because when you add subsidies, abatements, additional costs, transportation, et cetera, you get some very interesting results, and we would like to have that out for folks. We're also getting data out to help create and retain jobs. A lot of people come here. I saw something very interesting in a town outside of Houston. A business owner, somebody wanted to come in to move into this town. In 45 minutes, they spit out for them at this Chamber of Commerce, they spit out a kind of a GIS thing, and it has every single location, this is in Fort Bend County, every single location with a loading dock where all, if that's what they needed, a loading dock where all the water lines are, power lines are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, so that they can come in and decide if they want to do business there. We're spending a lot of time trying to get together economic development data for people. We think it's pretty important. How is the economy doing? Well, great, actually, sort of. This is political obfuscation. We're doing okay. $1.5 billion in spare change showed up at the end of the session. $400 million of that actually came from an agency which had its funds swept. One agency did not spend all the money allocated to it, and so all of those are swept at the end of the biennium. So that would have been 1.1, but sales tax revenue has been fantastic, 10.9 last year. The year before was like 12 something, unbelievable. Oil and gas sector is booming, so we've got about $1.5 billion on top of the 7 we predicted. We're at $8.5 billion surplus going into the next session, which I think is kind of important. Housing. Housing is really interesting. You've been hearing about the subprime market. New housing permits in Texas are down 25%. However, sales of existing homes, the number of sales is down not too much, and the prices have not taken a big hit generally. When the economy of the U.S. is booming, we get about 200,000 new jobs every month, which is a lot. Right now, it's at about 100,000. In September, it was 101,000 new jobs across the country, and Texas was responsible for 25,000 of those, which is grossly disproportionate to our size, second largest state, but we're not 25% of the population. We're about 8% of the population of the state. So I'm watching the clock. We do a lot. We really do know everything. And that is a benefit and a burden. We're in, last point, we're in litigation right now about availability of birth date information for state employees. And when I was in the legislature, I got a bill passed in the House which kept confidential the information of jurors. We had cases of jurors sitting there, jurors was in the panel, and the defendants were reading the jury card, and they were looking at, oh, Mary Smith, here's her phone number. These defendants were calling from the jail at night, hey, Mary, golly, gee, I sure hope you vote for me on the jury panel, which seemed a little bit intimidating. And so we got that information withheld. With respect to identity theft, we had a request by somebody to get the month, day, and year of every single one of my employees at the office. And we asked why. And I can understand year, I can understand month, but when you get to month, day, and year, that is a huge amount of information with respect to identity theft. And we're in litigation about that. I don't know where it's going to go, but it's something that I do worry about. This would potentially mean the secretary in every sheriff's office, the secretary in every school district, every single member of the public who works anywhere in the public could hypothetically have all of their personal data about month, day, and year public. So that's something that with respect to open government, which I'm very committed to, there's open government with the limit of protecting my folks that I work with. So that's kind of an overview, and I watch the clock, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
As you know, there are several propositions on the ballot for the election, and several of them require lots of money. And so if all of those are voted for in by the citizens of Texas, how do you expect that to affect the budget? Well,
let me differentiate between voting in bonding authority and then issuing bonds. For example, Proposition 12 is $5 billion for bonding authority to issue bonds. I'm on the bond review board. We will not issue a bond unless there is the revenue available to pay for it. And so that's really part of where I come in, is that, okay, if they want $5 billion, is the revenue there? There's a proposal up next month for about $2.5 billion. It's already been authorized, $2.5 billion, and we're sort of checking our numbers to see if the revenue is available for the bonding period while it's issued to give them money. So yes, it sounds like a lot of money. I'm not minimizing it at all, but the question really is that the check and balance is you don't issue the bonds until you are absolutely certain that you have the money to pay for them. We are constitutionally required to have a balanced budget. We can't go in the red. And so if we found out that we have a legal obligation to pay for some bonds, we would cut someplace else. We don't do deficit spending. We can't do it.
Well, it's been too long for you to remember, but out of fear of being given work to do, I was the guy at TDA who would hide in the bathroom when Beverly Boyd gave word you were on your way upstairs. But I have a couple questions for you.
We love Beverly.
I have two related questions for you. One, how do you square your bureaucratic obligations with your political ambitions? And in a related vein, you've moved from Ag Commissioner now to Comptroller. In what ways does this affect your ability to move up the political food chain?
Well, one, I don't want to move up. And I say that unequivocally. I want to stay Comptroller. It's a great job. I don't want to be governor, don't want to be lieutenant governor, don't want to be U.S. senator. So it does not, I have no political ambitions to worry about except getting reelected. I was in China, and somebody asked me, I was in China talking to some ag students in September, and they said, well, gee, what do you do if people don't like you? Kind of a big question. You know, hand them more combs and try to bribe them. But the point is, I guess what I would say is, you know, if you do your job right, that's the result that I want. And I'm liberated. I'm really liberated by not wanting another job. It's really, really handy.
Just out of curiosity, I'm very curious about the $400 million in swept funds from an agency. It was one agency. Mm-hmm. Do you feel comfortable saying which one?
TEA.
Could you tell through their budget what it was not spent on?
Mm-mm.
Curious.
I mean, we just had heard that there was a lot of money coming, and so it was $400 million. Listen, be happy. That's perky.
Yeah.
I have no idea what it didn't get spent on, but that's something that the appropriations process will have looked at. Gee, what strategy didn't get done? The Legislative Budget Board would always say, did you do all the things? Like when I was Ag Commissioner, did we check enough gas pumps? You know, we do check gas pumps, and for weights and measures, if you bought 15 gallons, did you get stiffed? Yes, sir.
In relation to that question, at the beginning of the next fiscal process, how is the surplus that you're speaking of going to affect the budgeting in the state for the future bienniums?
Well, it's going to be fine for the next biennium. I don't know what the margins tax, the new revised franchise tax, is going to bring in. We will not have any hard data until all the money comes in by August the 15th, and then we won't know who didn't pay correctly till November. What I think is going to happen at some point is, as property tax relief continues to come in, you've still got to have this money swept aside to do that, and we're going to have the money. The question will be, does the margins tax replace the franchise tax? Is everything held harmless so that you have all the money that you're supposed to have? The legislature was extremely disciplined this time. They did not go out and spend the money, and for that I commend them, because they kept asking me, do I know how much money will come in the margins tax? And we did a survey, and the survey was really kind of like Jell-O. We sent out 3,400 surveys. Only 1,600 people replied. By Jell-O, I mean no certainty, no hard anything. And there was no requirement to be accurate. There's no penalty for not being accurate. And so one enterprise with $2 billion in revenues said their tax obligation would be $10,000, which I thought was a little low. And so we have no idea how it's going to work. But I think it's important for us to sort of be prudent, because I do worry about some things coming. We've got some costs coming up. Medicare and Medicaid, Medicaid in particular, is going to be a huge, huge, huge dollar number, and it's right behind the horizon. And so if we spend all the money now, we'd be coming back to people and saying, give us more money, and that's not a good idea. Lots of big stuff, a lot of big ticket items down the road.
They're going to let me ask a question, I guess. You know, I was struck by, I'm struck by a few things, but I was struck by your reference to getting things passed through the legislature, you know, when you were Ag Commissioner and now. Could you talk a little bit about what that's like? I think for a lot of people it's not something they see as much, but the way that the statewide officials lobby the legislature, essentially. Could you talk about what that process is like, especially given that you were once on the other side?
That's been a help, having been in the legislature, because I sort of know how hard it is. What any agency does, all agencies, you have to have a legislator carrying a bill that you try to get. And then, so I would carry bills. I mean, I would have legislators carry bills, and then they would ask me to go work the committee. So I would go to the committee, and I would say, Representative X has got this great bill, which I'm very much for, and I would maybe go testify, quote, in support of, as opposed to in favor of, testify on instead of in support of. Although as a statewide official, I often testify in favor of. This is a weird, arcane thing. There's 3 boxes you can check. You are there as a witness for, you are there as a witness against, or you are there as a witness on. And virtually every single state employee from an agency checks the on box. And I would get a little more bold, and I would check in support. And they knew if I showed up, it was in favor of it. And I would work the committee. I mean, I had people for dinner. I worked everything. And I know how hard it is to get things passed. Thousands of bills are written, and not so many thousands are passed. And if I didn't take it personally and go work it, it wasn't going to happen. And as I say, having been there, I'm kind of an autocrat, and I wanted the bills the way I wanted them, but that's not the process. Process is there's going to be change, and so you have to understand that, and maybe you get positive improvements, or maybe you have to think about incrementalism. I'll get something this time, and I'll get some more next time, and I'll get some more the time after that. I think in the state, it's much easier to do that than in Washington. Washington is really much tougher, and we actually get more stuff done. Things did get done this session. Lots of things actually happened, and as I say, having been there, when I was in the legislature, I certainly thought that, you know, agency folks were all, you know, they're all kind of crooked. They're all doing something bad. But now I'm one of them. And so now I'm one of those evil people, and I understand that I have an obligation to build trust and confidence in the legislator's mind. They have to believe that I won't lie. They have to believe that I will give them good information, because there's always another time. And if you misrepresent something, it's really, really dangerous. And it's short-sighted, and it's not honest. Yes, sir.
In terms of accounting, is the Texas Comptroller's Office concerned about the cost involved in the convergence of U.S. GAAP and international standards? And if so, how does the Texas Comptroller Office plan to handle these costs?
You mean government accounting, accepted accounting principles, GAAP? You mean GASB 45? Are you worried about GASB 45? Give me a question again, please.
In terms of accounting, is the Texas Comptroller's Office concerned about the costs involved in the convergence of U.S. GAAP and international standards?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Our office is supposed to adhere to generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP analysis. And we have deviated somewhat from that with what's called GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, which is in Connecticut, and there was a GASB 45, which is a ruling by these folks in Connecticut about how we represent various possible obligations and liabilities. And as the comptroller, I'm supposed to put together what's called the Certified Annual Financial Report, which is supposed to accumulate all the stuff from the UT system, the A&M system, and all the state agencies, including ERS and TRS. And there's a lot of conversation about, does government expose its liabilities? Does the public understand what its liabilities are? And I'm now being an old lawyer. If we do not have a legal obligation on, for example, it's what this particularly is about is other post-employment benefits. If you're a retiree and you're post-employment, about those benefits, and I said, if we have no contract, we have zero contract. I do not have a contract of any kind post-employment, and I'm not willing to have the state on paper assume a liability that it does not have in fact. However, the ratings agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch's would like to know what this creature would look like. So we're going to put this guesstimated number of the liability of the state in the notes to the financial statement. But I am not going to put us in the position of saying these are actual liabilities, because we, again, have a constitutional prohibition against spending any money beyond a 2-year period. We can't go out 20 years and agree to do it. And in every contract we write, it's if the money exists in 2 years. That's probably not answering your question. Is it sort of what you were after? Sort of? But this is a national standard, not international. Yes, sir.
I was curious about what you were just talking about, the post-employment.
OPEBs.
Okay, so that's for Could you go into a little bit more detail?
Other post-employment benefits. This came up in the private sector under FASB, which is the Financial Accounting Standards Board. I love it. You know, it's kind of awful that I know this stuff. Anyway, but FASB, FASB 105 or 6. So what happened was FASB said, General Motors, you guys, you got to reflect all of these employees and their possible health stuff later. Well, people, their boards of directors saw these gigantic numbers and they said, okay, we are getting out of the retirement health business. 70-some-odd% of the corporations in America saw these numbers, scared the heck out of their boards, and they dropped, modified or dropped health benefits for their employees. So that has been out about 8 or 9 years. And so GASB, son of FASB, came in, and it was the same thing. And again, some states, Illinois has a lot of contracts, but we don't have a contracted relationship. We're an at-will employment state. And we can basically fire every state employee with no grounds. They can come back and sue on various other equal protection claims, but we don't have those claims. What I was worried about was every single 2 years, every budget cycle, they start from scratch looking at how much they're going to pay for these employee health benefits. They've dropped them. They've lowered them. In 2 years, in '03, we were short of money, so they dropped them. And so for us to predict that we absolutely have a known obligation, A, we can't possibly know it, and no account will tell you, an actuary will tell you you can know something out 50 years or 35 years. And secondly, we're prohibited. We are prohibited from assuming that is a real liability. So what does that mean for state employees? Well, state employees actually supported the legislation that got passed because they said, if people see these large, scary numbers that are the mythical beast, then they will end up firing more employees or changing stuff. And so we tried to strike a balance between transparency, disclosure, which we think is real important, and also not assuming a liability that we do not legally owe. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a really detailed question about accounting. No,
go for it.
Actually, I want to ask about higher education. Where do you think the consensus is in the state in terms of higher education funding right now? It seems to me if we were to look back in the kind of long sweep of things, we've undergone some change in terms of the legislature's sort of commitment of funds to higher education in the state. I'm wondering what's your feel. I mean, this is more of a feel than a detailed question, I suppose, although you have a look at the numbers. Where do you think we are in terms of the state funding for higher education versus an increased reliance on tuition, these kinds of questions?
When the state made the decision legislatively to deregulate at the request of the institutions were feeling choked. If the state's not putting in enough money and I need more money, I have to be out of this box, and so I've got to be able to change fees. So they did that. They've raised fees a number of times. The average tuition increase in the last, 12, 13 years has been about 11%. So they deregulated. There is no move to go back. And legislatively, people really are struggling with, in the legislature, they understand how critically important higher education is. And I was talking to some folks from UT. Texas, with 23 million people, has 2 flagship systems, UT and A&M. California, with 31 million, 34 million people, has 9. And so you really have to ask, what are we going to do about it? The problem that I see is there's kind of an amorphous desire to have higher education, but a non-precise solution for funding it. And a lot of conversation this session about scholarships. You probably read a lot about the Guaranteed Tuition Fund, and we shut the guaranteed, what I call TTF, Texas Tomorrow Fund 1, we shut it down. You can't get into it anymore, but they established TTF2, and TTF2 comes on board next fall, and that will be a different way to fund it. TTF1 was absolute guarantee, and the state projections didn't work out. The revenue, the income did not match the outgo, and so you had an X, and we are short, underwater, some number. X billion, Y billion, Z billion, some number. But everybody believes in education. And I mean, again, it's sort of back to the amorphous. Oh, we love education. And I'm personally a supporter of Texas grants. I'm a supporter of scholarships, but I'm also a supporter of people getting their kids to go. I was talking to a gentleman out in San Angelo, and they offered full tuition to 60 freshmen, 60 sophomores, 60 juniors, 60 seniors in San Angelo, full ride, everything, tax, title, and license, if these kids would go. So the 4 times 60 is 240 kids, and they only had 10 applicants. What we're seeing in the state is a kind of a shift. Folks, kids are working longer. They're not actually necessarily in school from 18 to 21. They may be in school 19 to 27 or 25 to 32. And so they're postponing. It may not even be so much a scholarship as I'm foregoing salary, I'm foregoing income from outside. And I don't know how to address that part. The guy at Angelo State was very horrified. Out of 240 young men and women, only 10 took it, and only 2 graduated. So there's a lot to do. We're going to try to do some things in public education to get them ready for folks like you in higher education, virtual schools, et cetera, so that people can actually do some work in the daytime and go to school at night. But the real challenge is not so much the cost of school for most people. It's, do I have the time? Can I delay whatever else it is in my life? Can I forego the income? And maybe that's not true, but it's certainly true of some schools that I talked to the board members. At U of H, I'm told, the average age is like 27. Well, that's a very different population. My kids all went to school 18 to 22. I went to school 17 to 21. So we all kind of went through the so-called normal time. Well, that's no longer normal, from what I'm told. And that's something we have to address. How do we get these people, whether they're 18 or 25 or 27, how do we get them the post-secondary training that they need for the economy? Because we're going to get run over. Last question.
Compared to other state legislatures, the Texas legislature is often considered less professional, given the fact that it meets only every other year and it has shorter sessions than a lot of states. Do you think becoming more professional would be advantageous to the state of Texas and to your office, or do you think the current system is sufficient?
I think it's a not correct statement, say that we're not professional, the legislature. Those folks all have other lives. They are all professionals in their other lives. And when I was a legislator, I thought it was pretty great that we were out of town because we couldn't do stuff to you. Or for you. And so I think there's a lot of feeling that if the issues are really hot, you'll get them done. If it's a special session, you'll get it done. But they are professional. These are really competent people, by and large, who work hard. They have other lives. They're doing something else. They couldn't have gotten the vote. It's a job interview process when you run. You're interviewing the voters, and they're interviewing you and saying, gee, we trust you to be smart enough, competent, whatever it is. And so if you pass the interview test, then you get elected. And these people did pass the interview test.
Let's thank Comptroller Susan Combs. Thank you.
Thank you.